Hi there, welcome back to IndyCar on the 19th of February. Now, it's not often I do a programme just about numbers, and certainly not usually massive amounts of money, but I think in this occasion it's a good idea to try and keep a sense of perspective. The Scottish media is obsessed with going on about how much our ferries cost, and now that the Glen Sannox is actually steaming around by itself quite happily, doing successful sea trials and looking every inch the ship it's meant to be, now the unionists are getting a bit annoyed about this and starting to complain again about the £68 million cost overrun for the two ferries. But let's set this in a little bit of perspective. First of all, before we go on to the subject of the ferries, James Cleverly recently said, this is a Tory minister, that Scotland should do a lot more to resettle displaced people fleeing wars, people who have come to the United Kingdom searching for asylum, for a safe place, and having been granted asylum, they're then dispersed to different parts of the UK. According to Mr. Cleverly, Scotland really isn't pulling its weight, and we should be doing an awful lot more to resettle more people here. Well, it's interesting to note that an expert has already rubbished this particular piece of nonsense and has told Mr. Cleverly that Scotland, per head of population, remembering that we are approximately, something like 8% of the population of the United Kingdom, but our population per head resettles 50% more people who have claimed and successfully claimed asylum here in Scotland than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. So we're already 50% ahead of the rest of the United Kingdom in resettling these poor people who have fled war zones and persecution. So that's just one number, but let's move back to the issue of the ferries. So we know they cost £68 million more than they should have done because of a botched contract system, which led to cost overruns, and the ferry company eventually went back to its original plan to build the ferries to run on conventional fuels. So, fine, job done, the ferries are getting finished and they're going to go into service. And you might think, well, they would stop going on about it, but they don't, they just keep going on and on. But it's worth pointing out that the United Kingdom has wasted far more money on ships of its own. I'm talking about the two massive and unnecessary aircraft carriers for which the United Kingdom hasn't got enough airplanes for both of them. One of which, as we know, the Queen Elizabeth, is now steaming northwards to Rosyth to have its starboard propeller shaft repaired. But these aircraft carriers, between the two of them, actually cost somewhere in the region of £4,000 million. That's £4 billion. Now that, if you take that and compare it to the cost of the two ferry overruns, that's 58 times more expensive than the overruns of these ferries. 58 times more expensive. And where is the money coming from for the two aircraft carriers? Well, you've guessed it, it's coming out of our pockets. So we should be angry about that for a start, considering that these aircraft carriers have proved to be virtually worthless. But that's not the end of the story. We also know about the so-called High Speed 2 project. I suppose this is a make-work project devised by the Tories to give them something to do, and I suppose to shave 20 minutes off journey times between London and Birmingham, with the line not even running further north than that. It was supposed to head up towards Leeds and Manchester, and it doesn't even get there, and it certainly doesn't cross the border. But the cost overruns on High Speed 2 make the aircraft carriers look like, buttons by comparison. The cost overruns on High Speed 2 are running currently, the total cost of High Speed 2 is estimated to be £33,000 million. That's £33 billion on including the cost overruns for a railway which only goes between London and Birmingham and has started developing sinkholes across the countryside where its tunnels go under farmland. But I calculated that if you compare that cost of HS2 with the cost of the ferries or ferry overruns, it is 485 times more expensive for this waste of space train set than it is to pay for these two lifeline ferries, which are definitely needed to serve the island communities. 485 times more expensive. And where does the money come from for that? Well, you've guessed it, it comes from us. We pay our taxes, the government then borrows money to buy or to pay for the contracts for these ridiculous boondoggle schemes, which really have absolutely no benefit whatsoever to Scotland in any way at all. Unless we travel all the way down to Birmingham on a conventional train and then get on one of these high-speed 2 trains and get to London 20 minutes sooner, that's the only benefit you could possibly get from this. 20 minutes off a journey time between Birmingham and London. And that's sod all use to most of us, because most people who do travel from Scotland to London do so in aeroplanes at a fraction of the cost of the railway journeys. So all of this adds up to a massive amount of wasted money. These 2 aircraft carriers, the money could have been better spent on air defences, surface ships that actually work, or some way of defending our massive offshore energy infrastructure from potential problems and aggression by other countries or terrorists or whatever. But no, it's been wasted on these massive, enormous wastes of space, these missile magnets called aircraft carriers, which are only any use when they're tagging along behind a massive fleet of American aircraft carriers. So I think let's keep all this in proportion. Scotland is already dealing with 50% more. I refuse to call these people migrants. These are asylum seekers who have been seeking shelter here from war zones and persecution, and any country worth its salt would welcome them. But the fact that James cleverly thinks that we're not pulling our weight is just plain nonsense, and it's already been rubbished by experts today in the press. Scotland's already more than pulling its weight. In fact, it's England which is lagging behind Scotland as usual. There is one other piece of information today that I think is worth remembering, and that is that British oil and gas companies, I'm talking largely about British gas, companies like that, are making the most obscene profits that they have ever made. Profits for BP and Shell, as far as I understand it from figures published today, are up by over 900% since the COVID pandemic ended. 900%. So the profits are 9 times higher than they would normally be. The British government has set the price tariff on our energy based on the high costs or the high prices being demanded by these companies for fossil fuels. And it neglects to point out that renewable energy produced by Scottish offshore wind and so on is the cheapest on the market. It's far, far cheaper than anything that the fossil fuel industry can produce. And yet we're being charged massively over the odds, far more money for a renewable energy than it actually costs to produce it. And this is all because the Tories are basically trying to ensure that the oil companies, whom I'm sure many of them have directorships in, have shares in, and perhaps get all kinds of little gifts from, are going to do supremely well, and everybody who invests in them is going to make a massive windfall out of it. The Labour Party has said now that it's not going to impose a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. Interestingly, the SNP has also said that it opposes the oil and gas windfall tax, which I think is a bit mystifying. But then again, I think that's a political move by the SNP and Labour in the coming election, because both of the two parties in Scotland want to be seen to be protecting the oil and gas industry in Aberdeen, making sure that the jobs remain there. And I can understand the fact that people want to protect jobs in Aberdeen. I don't object to that particularly, but I do object to 900% profit taking, and I think that is daylight robbery. So not only are we being robbed for aircraft carriers, we're being robbed for a train set that we can't use, we're also being robbed by the companies which extract the oil and gas from our territory and sell it back to us at a massively inflated price for the benefit of the Tories and their chums. Frankly, I think nothing is going to change politically in this respect, but I think it's interesting to keep a sense of perspective when it comes to the cost of the ferries. £68 million is a drop in the bucket. It is a tiny amount of money compared to the enormous amount of waste created by the British state. I also saw some economic reports over the last 2 days by various economists saying that the UK's economy is massively in debt. It's in a pit of debt that it could never escape from because it owes trillions, over £3.5 trillion. That's a lot of money. That's 3,500 million pounds. That's an unimaginable amount of money, and even paying off the debt interest on that is coming out of our pockets. The British state is on the brink of financial collapse, and it has squandered our money and is overcharging us for our own energy. And if that is not a reason to want to break free from the United Kingdom and have Scotland set its own course so it can tax its own energy resources fairly, then I don't know what is. That's it from IndyCar today. I'll hopefully see you later on in the week. I apologise for not appearing yesterday. I had a very busy day yesterday. I have several tests this week, 4 of them, and lots of people to prepare for it. So apologies for my absence yesterday. In the meantime, please keep donating to the channel as much as you can afford. It's really helping me to keep the content going. Also remember, you can pause and rewind these shows even when they're going out live. And obviously you can make comments live as you're doing at the moment, and you can also send messages live too. So I'll see you again later in the week. In the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. Remember, independence is no longer just a choice. It's now a necessity if we want to survive the final collapse, the economic collapse of what used to be the British Empire. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.